Welcome back to the RotoViz Best Ball Show. My name is Colm Kelly. I'm joined by RotoViz writer Conor O'Driscoll. Conor, you did an article recently talking about a contrarian path to supercharged elite tight end builds and the keys to trying to bring down the 2023 FFPC Best Ball Tournament. You, of course, did win the 2021 edition with a big Week 17 from some of the Cincinnati Bengals, including Jamar Chase. Myself, Sean Siegel, and Blair Andrews came in second place in that contest. So big success for RotoViz in that 2021 final. We're hoping to go back there in 2023. So we're going to use some of your insights today, particularly around elite tight end, how maybe that can factor into supercharging these rosters, as you wrote about recently up on rotoviz.com. There will be a link to this article in today's show notes. You can check out from Conor. If you're watching this over on YouTube, we'll be sharing some of the graphics as we go along through it here. But for people who may not be aware, the FFPC Best Ball Tournament is a $125 entry. I like the way it is based throughout the playoffs with 12-team leagues. Certainly makes it feel more achievable, Conor, and making it true to those. But we're hoping to make it true to that final week. But it is a format where it's 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, 1 tight end, and then 2 flexes. It is a 1 quarterback format. And that does really give a lot of potential for which way you want to build your rosters. If you're a running back drafter, if you're a wide receiver drafter, if you want to go for the tight end position. So lots of ways to do it. Firstly, when we're jumping into the article itself and looking at what the thesis behind it was, what was the opening thoughts? Obviously, we've known for quite some time the tight ends are very beneficial in tight end premium formats. But what were some of your thoughts going in as you started to do some research for this piece?
Well, the big thing that or the overall thesis of the article is, like you said, tight end premium, very important to a very important scoring feature. But on top of that, the 2 flex positions is really important, and because that means that, like Underdog, for example, you can start a maximum 4 wide receivers in any given week, but with 2 flexes, you can start a maximum of 3 tight ends in any given week. And that being able to start 3 total, it really changes the dynamic. Like, I know in a lot of other formats, the kind of like, even if you're going elite tight end, a lot of people will do is they'll get their elite and they're like, okay, I spent all this draft capital on this great guy. I'm just gonna wait so that I keep my overall cost at that position low. And honestly, that's what a lot of people do on FFPC too. But the way I prefer to think about tight end is that it's a lot closer to those other running back wide receiver positions than it is on Underdog. So like you want to think about, hey, they get this huge scoring boost. Hey, they can spike for great point totals in any given week. And the fact that you can start treat them just because, and it's a kind of like, just because you've gone elite tight end early does not mean that you should say, oh, I'm going to wait now until round 9, round 10. Like, particularly if you get a value on your second early tight end, then you should take it. No brainer. And that's sort of what I did in my my 2 teams that went to the finals last year. Both teams kind of had Kelsey went in the first. One team I grabbed Hawkinson, the other team I grabbed Kittle, and both teams kind of like in week 16 the tight end scoring really pushed them over to the top. Like, one team had Hawkinson go, I think, for 40 plus, and then I was able to use that in my tight end spot, and then Kelsey's 20 points in my flex, and then the other one had Kelsey, Kittle, and Tyler Higbee, and so they all went. Kelsey went for 20, Higbee went for 30, Kittle went for 30, and so that really kind of supercharged the points total and pushed that team over the top and into the final.
And obviously, we're going to look at it from the elite side of things today, from those earlier tight ends. But just to give some context as well, when you're thinking of tight end premium, you mentioned kind of the difference versus Underdog even, but you're getting a full point extra for every single reception to the tight end position versus PPR points, obviously, to wide receivers and running backs. But when you are looking into how those additional points can really rack up, the final that you won that we came second, and we ended up with a Noah Fant lineup fitting into our flex there. We had Mark Andrews as the starting tight end, but when it got to a situation, he was obviously still with the Denver Broncos at that point, but had a big week 17. But when you are getting, 7-8 receptions in a game and then possibly a touchdown on top of that for a tight end, it really isn't that difficult to push those tight ends, even the later guys like a Noah Fant at that particular point, into a range where they're up at 30 points. They're really lapping some of those later options, or definitely the later options, but potentially some of the mid to early options at running back and wide receiver as well with that additional bonus. So I think it's a really fun way to look at it. But today we're going to look at it from the elite side. So Conor mentioned the week 16 scores that got his team into the final here. If you're watching on YouTube, you will see some of those. You'll see in those lineups, Kelsey, Kittle, Higbee going for 34.9, 20.3 for Kelsey, and then 33 for George Kittle. And if we look at the rest of the lineup, we get Higbee as the top scorer that week, outscores Mahomes, who had 26 points. Then we have Saquon Barkley, 27, Devin Singletary, 20.5. So really the tight ends are carrying this team at that point to a total score that week of 193.4. We have the second team, 196.9. I mentioned Kelsey already, but you have Hawkinson at 42.4. And that lineup, we're getting into a range where he's doubling some of your other key players. We have Jalen Waddle, who had a big week, 25.3. We have Mahomes, who I mentioned as well, 26. So the other factor in these teams was interesting. It is a Mahomes Kelsey stack in both lineups as well. But when we move down into, obviously we know you had success last year. Digging deeper, your headline is the biggest mistake elite drafters make. Is that simply the case that you talked about of waiting too long for that second tight end, or is there any other additional parts when you dig in here? We can see the heat map up on rotoviz.com in the article.
It really is a case of waiting too long. Looking at data from 2017 through 2022, basically the ideal time in this window of history to select your tight end 2 has been somewhere between in the third round and the let's call it the 7th round, and in that spot where you're still getting real players who have real breakout opportunities, has been historically a very successful time to take your second tight end. And what's interesting is elite tight end drafters, and I'm defining that as a tight end 1 in either round 1 or 2. Last year, only 72% of those elite tight end drafters waited until after round 7. So, like we said, they pushed it all the way. There's like, okay, I got my strong tight end here. I can weigh that tight end down. Whereas, because of the scoring and the roster starting settings, I just don't think that's the right mentality. I think you obviously don't want to be reaching for tight ends to fit a strategy, but should really be open to when you get a value or you see someone at ADP who you would like, if you didn't already have a tight end, you should really think hard about selecting them.
You mentioned in the article as well, moving on from that, when you brought this up last year a little bit, the pushback was, the structural advantage mightn't be there based on, having to take that second option over a wide receiver, a running back, a quarterback in that range. When you dug in then with the win rates versus that, what did that show?
So, like you said, I did get a certain amount of pushback last year, which to some degree was fair. And it's like, hey, you're looking at these win rates in 2 and 3 year samples, maybe 4 years. And when you look at that analysis, a lot of that can be driven by individual player breakouts, which that's where the whole game of fantasy comes from. All success comes from breakouts, more or less. And when I kind of looked at the data over a couple of years, yes, there has been particularly strong breakouts in that range in the last 2 years. You have Mark Andrews in 21, TJ Hawkinson last year, Darren Waller in 2020. But it's not like this is just like a new trend. Like there's been breakouts throughout the years. Like you had Zach Ertz in 2017. You had Delaney Walker in 2017. Kyle Rudolph in 2017. You had Austin Hooper of all people in 2019 who had a big year. And so like getting not being afraid to draft these tight ends who are capable of breakouts has been rewarded throughout the years, and it's not just some recent trend.
And out of those names as well that you mentioned, Delaney Walker might be the one of those names that was more, I guess we'll say, pushing on towards veteran territory when he had that kind of breakout at that point of his career in 2017. But looking at those other names, something that Blair wrote in a recent piece, when we talk about drafting tight ends, whether it's in these ranges or particularly when it's late as well, you're looking at drafting profiles for who is that next, I guess, true elite tight end. So at that point in the draft, even if you're in the 6th or 7th round, there may be certain question marks, but you're not really drafting those guys who are on the downslope of their career at the end of their window. I guess we'll say you're really drafting those guys who are potentially pushing up into the Travis Kelce range. But the settings and where it gets really interesting here, and this is kind of a little bit like what I touched on when I was saying about how even later in the drafts the tight end position can have such an advantage in this particular format with the extra flex spots, with the additional options, or with the additional points rather, in tight end premium. If you look at the Win the Flex tool up on the website, pretty much once you get past a certain point, it's all upside here for the tight end position. And I guess we can filter this to both the elite option as we talk through it and to the potential later options as well.
Yeah, so what's pretty clear here is that after pick 50, because of the tight end premium, without forgetting any of the roster stuff, tight ends project based on historical scoring. They've been outscoring wide receiver and running back past pick 50 throughout the draft. And so, I mean, that's interesting for sure, in that, like, hey, people might think, oh, I'm drafting this tight end in the 4th or 5th round. Should I really do this? I already have my elite guy. It's like, well, actually, with you could actually be getting a higher projected player, and then when you look at the kind of value over replacement, which means you're factoring in the fact that, hey, you can start up the tree, then it really pushes the tight end ahead versus the other positions. In terms of like the Win the Flex tool and the projection for the really early elite guys, I think it is interesting, and it is kind of like notable that the early tight end Win the Flex does not really like the early tight end, and it does speak to, hey, tight end scoring is usually driven by a select handful of players who really smash, and then you have duds. Probably more duds than other positions, and that brings the average scoring down. However, we know from looking at other data that the win you get from selecting the early tight end that does smash vastly outweighs any kind of loss from selecting the ones that don't smash.
I think that is very fair, Connor. As we start to work through kind of as we've gone through this, I think this is showing what the conclusion is going to be as we work our way through it. But what are some of the other parts as we work towards the conclusion, and what people, particularly in this format, should be doing in 2023. The other thing is with the win the flex too, like the more flex positions you have, if there's a positional advantage like we see at the FFPC, it's going to ramp up that additional advantage with multiple flexes. So for example, at Underdog with just the one flex, and in some other scoring settings, I had people reach out to me recently about the win the flex tool, and people were surprised that running backs can win the flex depending on what settings that you do put in. But it's not all about saying that running backs don't get an option in the flex, and that can be the option, for example, over at Underdog. But in this format, as we work our way through it, what are some of the, you have a word of caution here, but what should you be thinking about for 2023? And are you back on board of the double elite tight end approach here?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And before we go into the word of caution section, just the table just above, where you see, hey, they've taken 2 tight ends before round 6. How many total should they stop at in FFPC Sim? And clearly, you should not stop at 2. You want to grab your third tight end even still, and it, like I said, it's because you can start up the tree, and they project so well throughout the draft because of the tight end premium scoring. If you want to, when we get into the kind of word of caution, it sort of ties back into what we were talking about in the last section, where you do want to be careful, a little bit careful about too early selections at tight end. And I think there is some nuance in this. Like especially you don't want to be reaching for that first or second tight end, just to fit the strategy and like, oh yeah, 2 elite, happy days. Because like we kind of alluded to, there is a kind of like heavy bust rate as well. Like the spikes are so good, they carry you so far, but there is higher bust risk, and part of that is that tight ends are more likely to get injured than other positions. I know that I saw Curtis Patrick and Dave Cabin. They had a start where in the first and second round they started Kelsey, Mark Andrews.
Yeah,
and I know they talked through that quite a lot. And part of their thinking was, hey, Mark Andrews almost never falls to the second to this pick, and we will be one of only a very small handful of teams that have this Kelsey Mark Andrews start, and then if they both hit, like we get all this upside. That's I think that sort of makes sense. But like I said, do want to be careful about reaching and overpays to get the double elite start.
And then when we're moving further down into our, I guess, final parts of how to play it this year, I think the listeners will be summing it up, and I'm going to sum it up for what people may be thinking at this particular point. Not the players in particular, but we're looking at a double elite tight end start if possible, if it fits in with the way ADP is playing out, your draft slot, all that thing's all been played into consideration. But then 3, so adding that additional one that little bit later. Are you always going to stop at 3 in that build, or are you going to move on to a 4th option as well?
It really, honestly, it really depends. I almost always am going to stop at 3. However, I should say, I'm not necessarily always going to. The situations where I might grab a 4 is, hey, we're in the late rounds, a tight end has dropped way past ADP, and particularly, let's say, round 16 through 20, and I'm looking at my alternative options, and I'm like, the hit rates on these other guys is so low, and I'm getting a value on a tight end who I think could be a legitimate player in fantasy football this year. That would be a situation where I'd look to grab a 4, where I think, okay, my opportunity cost is just too low to ignore this.
The other part to jump into there, obviously we've talked about, the tight end side of things. Have you seen building these teams last year and the past, even this year? Is there other challenges then to building out the rest of the roster with taking 2 tight ends in those first, say, 5 rounds, building out your wide receivers, your tight ends, your quarterback, or your running backs, your quarterbacks? Any other notable things that you think would help people while trying to take this approach?
Yeah, so you do have to be pretty careful and thoughtful about what other positions you're selecting when you take 2 tight ends earlier. Obviously, it goes without saying is that it makes it harder to hit your kind of like wide receiver thresholds. I know there's like the 5 wide receivers before 10, and then there's all the different variations that people are doing this year. It does make that harder. So you do have to be thoughtful about like, okay, am I going to do 2 tight ends early? Am I going to select an early QB? And also I'm going to select early running backs. Like you can't do all those things and then still get as much wide receiver firepower as you need. So you've either got to push quarterback into the window and you're grabbing the kind of like Tua Tagovailoa and your Richardson types or later, or you're going to have to push running back. And this is what makes drafting fun, is that there's such clear trade-offs. You gotta take a hit somewhere and then figure out how you're going to catch up. But would recommend that you don't do that with wide receiver where possible.
Last question to fit in here is, outside of Travis Kelce, probably Mark Andrews, they're the 2 tight ends usually going as the earliest in ADP. Who is your favorite tight end to draft as that second elite option in 2023?
Personally, favorite option would be TJ Hawkinson. Obviously, a little bit of bias for me that he scored that 41 points in week 16. But definitely you're thinking about kind of like cost controlled ways. Like he's not terribly cheap, but you can still get a first 2 picks that are non-tight end. Really like him. Pat Freiermuth, he's a little bit later. Really like him. He really had an increase in the amount of routes that he was running. He was running a kind of like almost a true elite tight ends amount of or percentage of routes last year, and you're getting a nice price there. And he definitely fits the bill of like younger tight end getting the opportunity, and now it's up to him to truly make the most of it.
Both guys that I really like. So, and I don't think there's any surprise there that we probably like the same guys, Connor, and there's a bias towards TJ Hawkinson. That tends to be the way my drafts go as well. Myself and Sean had a fun debate on the TJ Hawkinson draft over at Underdog last week. So, yeah, we're going to do an Underdog draft right after we finish this. So it will come out on RotoViz on the Best Ball feed over the next couple of days. But let's see if we can get past TJ Hawkinson and if we're going to end up drafting him over there. But we'll see what happens. Looking forward to talking through that strategy on that draft. But of course, you can follow Connor over on Twitter. I think he's a criminally underfollowed account over there. If you've liked what you've heard today, it's Dricko Out. It will be in the show notes as well. Check out that. He won the FFPC Best Ball Tournament in 2021, got 2 teams to the final in 2022. So we're heading back there again in 2023. You can check his work up on RotoViz.com. My name is Colm Kelly. You can follow me on Twitter at OverTimeIreland. And until we are back, have a good one.